In this video, I'm going to show you how to find equivalent fractions using the pictorial method. So this means we'll be drawing some bar models just like these here. So I'll explain how we draw those or why we draw them a certain length in just a moment. And that has everything to do with the denominator. So if we go and recap what we learnt yesterday and label up our fraction, we know the denominator is our bottom number. And denominator means total number of parts. So if I put total parts, the number on top of our fraction is the numerator. And this is really important today because this is the number we need shaded, or parts shaded rather than square shaded. So I'll put parts shaded. So for this first question, we're going to find which fraction of tenths is equivalent to 1/2. So how many tenths are equivalent to the fraction 1/2? Now we're going to follow the same process as yesterday in terms of shading and how we go about that. So if you see, I've got two models and we know that these models are 10 squares long. The reason they are 10 squares long is because we're trying to find an equivalent fraction of tenths. So that means 10 parts total, and I find it easier personally to draw my model to scale, so to make sure it is the same as the fraction. So I'm going to start off first of all, and sometimes you can do this by eye. Now with half it is rather easy to do this by eye, and for the first one I'm going to split it into half. So all I'm going to do is just split it in half. And if I'm trying to find that half fraction, I know I want, out of the two parts in total, one of those needs to be shaded, because that is my numerator. And I'm going to shade half. So I've got the fraction half here, but I want to know how many tenths 1/2 is equivalent to. So I'm going to take my second bar model, which is 10 squares long, and I'm going to use the shading process to find out what half is. So out of every two squares, I will shade one. And by the time I've completed this model, I will count up the squares, and that will tell me how many tenths are equivalent to 1/2. So if we go ahead with the first one, so I shade 1 out of a total of 2, 1 out of 2. So ultimately, when it comes to half, you just end up skipping 1 out of 2. And then I end up at the end of the model. If I want to find out how many tenths are equivalent to 1/2, I just need to count up how many squares I've got shaded. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 squares shaded. So I know 5 tenths are equivalent to the same as 1/2. If I squished all of those squares together, you'd find it actually took up the same amount of space as that top model. And if we count the squares I've shaded in the top model, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, again, it matches. I'm now going to use the same process to find how many sixths are equivalent to 1/2. So same process, but this time we're using 6. So obviously for that reason, I've drawn a model that is 6 squares long. As I mentioned, I use the denominator, and I use that to tell me how many squares long, because that is my total number of parts needed. So we start off again and we go and find half the first time, and you can do that just by eye. So we split it in half. Obviously splitting something in half means you need 2 parts in total. Because it's 1/2, that numerator is 1, I want 1 part shaded. Now I'm going to use that process to find out how many sixths are equivalent to 1/2. So remember, when it's halves, we shade 1, and the second part you leave blank. Shade 1, leave 1 blank, shade 1, leave 1 blank. So now if I go back and count up those shaded parts, 1, 2, 3, I can see that 3 sixths are equivalent to 1/2. Equivalent means the same, and that is what this little equal sign shows us. So if I label that, so we've got equivalent, and that means the same as. Just label that there. You will see this symbol lots when you're looking at fractions.